The theater of operations immediately focused on the capital axis where the density of strategic infrastructure, command nodes and transport arteries concentrated decisive depth and where control of a limited number of transit corridors determined the tempo of reinforcement and sustainment. The strategic objective declared by the attacking direction sought to impose coercive pressure through a mass strike on urban and logistic targets to disrupt governance, degrade command networks and create operational friction across adjacent sectors. The defending formation interpreted the attack as a direct challenge to national resilience and reoriented forces to combine immediate deterrent response with protection of critical nodes. The geography of the area placed premium value on control of river crossings, suburban rail junctions and the primary arterial highways that channel logistics into the city, and those lines served as the hinge for both offensive projection and rapid reinforcement. The capital's energy grid and main substations formed dual-use nodes whose loss would produce cascading civilian effects and simultaneously constrain the mobilization and sortie generation of defending forces. The disposition of the attacker concentrated strike groups and standoff assets capable of long-range effects while assembling mechanized elements for potential follow-on maneuver into adjacent axes designed to threaten encirclement or to fix defending reserves. The defender arrayed layered belts of local defense, mobile reaction brigades and urban specialist units trained in close-quarter containment and in protection of governmental facilities, and engineering battalions prepared contingency bridging and bypass options to preserve essential supply flows. The logistics picture showed constrained rolling stock at marshalling yards and limited convoy throughput on primary approaches, and the scarcity of secure fuel nodes increased the sensitivity of operational plans to any interdiction along the feeder routes. The command arrangements on both sides reflected an awareness that control of communications and information flow would shape the campaign as much as kinetic action, and both sides placed high priority on protecting fiber nodes, radio relay points and command relay hubs that enabled synchronization across dispersed formations. The attacking plan sought to combine kinetic and non-kinetic means by aligning strike packages against dual-use infrastructure with electronic suppression tasks to deny automated recovery and cyber tasks to complicate remote diagnostics, thus converting physical damage into protracted functional denial. The defender prepared layered responses that included immediate isolation procedures for struck installations, prepositioning of mobile generators at hardened nodes and the rapid concentration of rescue and repair teams under military escort to restore minimal functionality. The operational logic for the attacker emphasized creation of multiple dilemmas for defenders by threatening simultaneous effects on energy, transport and command nodes so that allocation of scarce protection assets would necessarily dilute their effectiveness. The operational logic for the defender emphasized preservation of command continuity, maintenance of force projection capacity and the protection of routes that enabled rapid reinforcement and casualty evacuation. The city's suburbs and industrial belts became vital terrain as they housed fuel depots, transformer farms and rail linking points whose occupation or denial altered the sustainment calculus. The attacker prepared alternate axes of interdiction to fragment defender repair focus and to create a persistent need for escort resources, thereby imposing an attritional burden on logistics and reducing the pool of assets available for offensive employment. The defender established mobile modular distribution points and improvised forward dumps to shorten convoy routes and to reduce exposure time, and those measures redistributed vulnerability across a larger set of sites that required defense. The strategic interaction therefore assumed the character of a struggle over access rather than a purely positional battle, with emphasis on who could preserve the ability to move fuel, spare parts, and personnel into the critical urban teeth. The attacking sequencing node centralized authority to red-ask strike elements in response to emergent repair activity, and it placed interdiction cells on immediate call to engage repair staging points and to deny attempts at massed restoration. The defending sequencing node decentralized decision-making to tactical commanders to accelerate local repair and protection actions, while reserving strategic assets for coordinated counterstrikes when the operational picture permitted. The industrial capacity of the surrounding regions constituted both an operational vulnerability and a potential source for rapid replenishment, and ownership of rail marshalling yards that serviced those industries therefore acquired outsized importance as both targets and objectives. The attacker planned to exploit the proximity of dual-use nodes to population centers so that damage to infrastructure would impose political and social pressure on decision-makers while simultaneously creating material constraints on military sustainment. The defender prepared civil-military integration measures to shield essential services by rerouting electric loads, prioritizing hospital and command facilities and by employing military transport to maintain critical supply chains. The legal and operational filters applied to target selection on the attacker's side prioritized nodes where degradation would yield clear systemic consequences and where repair required specialized industrial inputs that could not be rapidly airlifted or improvised under contested conditions. The anticipated effect of successful interdiction included a temporary reduction in sortie generation for forward formations, elongation of maintenance cycles for critical platforms, and the diversion of engineer brigades and security detachments into prolonged protection tasks. The attacker anticipated that every hour required to secure heavy lifting capability for transformer replacement or to locate specialized replacement components would multiply the operational value of interdiction and would force the defender into a resource allocation dilemma between restoration and combat readiness. The defender anticipated that measures to harden the grid, to disperse stockpiles and to decentralize repair capability would mitigate some effects but would also consume manpower and material that could otherwise contribute to offensive operations. The operational baseline thus set the stage for a campaign where control over corridors, protection of dual-use infrastructure and the security of repair convoys would determine the tempo of subsequent phases. The introduction concluded with the recognition that the confrontation over the capital would be decided as much by logistics and industrial resilience as by immediate territorial encounters and that the ability to sustain distributed operations while protecting high-value nodes would define strategic advantage. The planning phase unfolded in parallel across both commands, each seeking to achieve dominance through preparation rather than immediate attrition. The attacking side concentrated on assembling strike packages that combined long-range precision weapons, standoff aerial platforms, and coordinated electronic attack units. Reconnaissance identified clusters of infrastructure within the metropolitan belt whose disabling would disrupt communications, transport, and power at once. These included transformer farms in the western districts, rail marshalling yards in the northern sector and fuel storage facilities positioned near industrial zones. Targeting doctrine dictated simultaneous application of force to overwhelm defensive reaction time and to impose system-wide paralysis before restoration measures could be enacted. Engineering and logistics staff completed detailed models of interdependencies between nodes, ensuring that a strike on one facility would cascade into secondary failures across several grids. Command oversight organized sequencing cells capable of retasking assets in real time once reconnaissance confirmed strike impact. The defending command oriented its own planning toward layered protection and immediate retaliation. Signals intelligence mapped potential flight corridors of incoming weapons, and mobile air defense detachments were redeployed to cover transformer belts and rail approaches. Rapid reaction engineering brigades rehearsed blackout protocols, isolation of damaged lines, and rerouting of load through auxiliary substations. Stockpiles of spare parts, conductors, and generator fuel were dispersed across hardened storage points to prevent loss through a single detonation. Strategic reserves of missile and drone systems were divided among several concealed launch areas surrounding the capital, ensuring capacity for instant counterfire. Command and control nodes migrated into subterranean facilities designed to maintain connectivity even under direct kinetic stress, and redundant fiber channels were laid between ministries, headquarters, and regional operation centers. Reconnaissance by the attacker employed unmanned systems and orbital imagery to register heat and radio signatures of active radars, fuel depots, and communication nodes. Signals interception provided information on defender readiness, frequency shifts, and likely response times. Simultaneously, cyber units infiltrated local network gateways to prepare for temporary denial of public communications and to mislead automated defense networks during the initial phase of strikes. The attacker's sequencing node integrated this data with meteorological and electromagnetic forecasts to select the optimal launch window when atmospheric conditions would hinder radar acquisition. For the defender, intelligence confirmed high-intensity preparation beyond the border region and indicated assembly of missile carriers in staging zones. Counterplanning centered on maintaining deception regarding true location of high-value targets and dispersing air defense batteries to avoid saturation. In the hours preceding the engagement, both sides activated measures intended to mask real intentions. The attacker conducted feints along secondary axes to draw attention toward the south, while the primary strike group aligned along the northeastern vector. The defender imposed communication silence across multiple sectors to prevent target confirmation. Civil defense units were placed on standby, power distribution centers switched to protected control mode, and emergency repair crews were pre-deployed near critical substations. Psychological and information preparation formed part of the attacker's intent. Disruption of command continuity through technical blackout would not only delay counterstrikes but also demonstrate reach and capability. Operational orders on the attacker's side specified multi-domain participation, missile brigades would initiate the assault, electronic warfare divisions would jam response frequencies, and reconnaissance drones would record effects for follow-up correction. The defenders' planning grid detailed retaliatory assignments. Once the scale and direction of the first strike were confirmed, counter-launches would target the adversary's staging and logistical points, emphasizing fuel and ammunition depots near the border zone. The outcome of these parallel preparations determined that the coming engagement would not remain limited to isolated targets but would expand into a reciprocal cycle of strikes and counterstrikes with immediate strategic implications for national command infrastructure. The launch phase opened with a massed application of long-range strike systems directed at urban dual-use nodes and selected command relay points intended to disrupt governance and sustainment capacity within the capital. Missile salvos and standoff aerial strikes concentrated on transformer farms, communication hubs, and fuel handling complexes to produce simultaneous degradation across energy, transport, and command networks. Air defense regiments engaged incoming trajectories with layered intercept profiles that consumed interceptor stocks and forced redeployment of mobile batteries to cover newly identified approach corridors, and the density of defensive fires created windows that reduced salvo effectiveness without preventing multiple penetrations of the outer protection layers. Electronic warfare units executed suppression tasks against radar sectors and automated switching arrays, degrading remote telemetry and complicating rapid isolation procedures so that physical damage expanded beyond the immediate blast envelopes through cascading failures in distribution rings. Precision strikes severed primary feeders at critical substations and damaged switching gear within central distribution nodes, producing extensive outages across administrative districts and isolating command facilities from normal power feeds. Secondary detonations occurred where fuel handling geometry or storage configurations allowed sympathetic blasts that amplified thermal damage and produced hazardous spills that restricted salvage and repair access. Communications nodes suffered both kinetic and non-kinetic effects as fiber junctions were physically damaged and as cyber operations corrupted monitoring and control systems, delaying the orchestration of emergency repair and complicating situational awareness at higher command echelons. Immediate defensive measures prioritized preservation of command continuity and the protection of life-sustaining services. Backup generators were brought online at command centers and hospitals under military escort. Manual switching protocols were implemented to reroute available power toward priority facilities, and emergency load shedding reduced non-essential supply to preserve capacity for critical nodes. Rapid reaction engineering detachments moved under armored escort to assess structural damage and to clear approach routes, yet many heavy lifting tasks were postponed due to unexploded ordnance and ongoing thermal hazards that made forward recovery operations perilous. Firefighting units faced compounded threats from electrical arcing and fuel fires, requiring coordinated suppression that slowed access to damaged equipment and extended outage durations. Urban mobility degraded as fuel distribution points near industrial belts were affected and as hit rail marshalling points forced rerouting of rolling stock and increased transit times for logistics convoys. The combined effect constrained both civilian life support and the defenders' capacity to mobilize sustained counterfire without first securing minimal sustainment flows. The defending command authorized immediate punitive reprisals oriented against staging and logistics nodes identified through pre-existing reconnaissance. Precision counterstrikes employed missile and drone assets to target fuel dumps, ammunition holding areas and selected marshalling yards in the adversary's staging zones to degrade the capacity for follow-on strikes and to impose reciprocal logistical burdens. Counterstrikes emphasized interdiction of supply and command links rather than large-scale territorial seizure, aiming to produce material effects that would reduce the adversary's ability to repeat massed launches. Electronic and cyber tasks accompanied kinetic countermeasures to deny the opponent easy reconstitution of damaged logistics networks and to complicate remote diagnostic efforts that would otherwise expedite recovery. The reciprocal strikes produced localized damage at transshipment points and created secondary disruptions in rail throughput and fuel handling that mirrored the effects experienced within the capital, thereby imposing symmetric strain on both sides' sustainment chains. Urban defense adjusted to a decentralized posture as tactical commanders assumed authority to allocate scarce fuel and spare parts among frontline units and essential civilian services. Forward operating groups implemented staggered power schedules, prioritized fuel allotments for air defense and emergency medical evacuation, and enacted strict movement controls to conserve resources and to reduce exposure of repair convoys to interdiction. Mobile air defense assets were repositioned to cover newly critical sectors, and nearest reserves were committed to guard repair staging points as engineering brigades attempted phased reconnection of isolated rings. Command nodes migrated into hardened subterranean positions and into dispersed mobile command posts using low-bandwidth secure links to coordinate repair and protection tasks under degraded communications conditions. The defender used targeted deception and emission control to complicate the adversary's reconnaissance and to conceal the location of key restoration efforts, while simultaneously employing unmanned reconnaissance to identify opportunities for limited counteraction against observed staging areas. Repair efforts proceeded incrementally as risk assessments dictated clearance of hazardous zones and as heavy lifting capability was staged under protective overlays. Temporary bypasses and mobile generation bridged critical loads where feasible, yet restoration timelines extended as replacement transformers, specialized cabling and high-capacity switching gear were unavailable locally and required secure transport under contested conditions. The attacker assigned interdiction follow-on cells to observe and, when possible, strike aggregated repair assets and supply convoys, maintaining pressure to prevent rapid normalization and to keep defender resources diverted into protection and recovery. The net operational effect of the launch and immediate response phase was a rapid exchange of material damage and reciprocal interdiction that shifted both commands into a posture dominated by protection of logistics, preservation of command continuity and prioritization of essential civilian services, while opportunities for decisive territorial maneuvers remained constrained by the need to secure and restore sustainment capabilities. The operation developed into a phase of active maneuver as both sides sought to convert initial effects into measurable advantage, with contest over transport nodes and communications hubs determining the shape of subsequent action. Armored task formations advanced along secondary highways and through industrial belts to seize control of rail marshalling points and highway junctions that remained operable after the opening exchanges, while mechanized reconnaissance probed for gaps in local defense where support detachments had been diverted to protect repair convoys. Engineering battalions deployed to prepare crossing points and to render temporary bypasses where bridges were damaged, placing pontoon elements and improvised bridging to sustain constrained flows of fuel and material. These engineering efforts required protection by close infantry and by small armored escorts in order to reach forward positions under intermittent interdiction. Command and control nodes that retained connectivity assumed outsized importance as seizure of a single signaling center or fiber node produced cascading delays in coordination, and units that achieved control of such nodes could impose manual fallback procedures that multiplied repair manpower requirements and slowed synchronized movement. The defender employed mobile reserves to plug threatened sectors and to escort prioritized convoys, exchanging depth for immediate security and creating localized shortages at forward defensive belts. These reallocations allowed exploitation forces to isolate small pockets and to establish blocking positions on approaches to key substations and depots. Artillery regiments and rocket groups were used to interdict likely relief corridors, producing interdiction fires that forced repair convoys to alter routes and to adopt night movement profiles that increased transit times and attrition risk. Electronic warfare teams continued to suppress automated switching and to jam remote diagnostics, complicating the adversary's ability to prioritize repair tasks and to vector scarce lifting equipment to the most consequential locations. Unmanned reconnaissance maintained persistent overwatch of repair staging areas and of newly established forward dumps, enabling strike planners to red-ask precision assets against concentrated repair effort and to avoid collateral engagement with dispersed civilian activity. Tactical interaction emphasized control of communications and movement rather than large-scale set-piece battle, with capture of a signaling hub or control node delivering outsized operational benefit by delaying coordinated repair across multiple sectors. Forces that seized rail switching yards could interdict rolling stock movement and capture locomotives and critical spares, thereby creating bottlenecks that went beyond immediate physical damage. Logistics detachments adapted by diversifying supply into smaller convoys and by utilizing civilian transport under military control to reduce signature and to increase survivability, but this dispersion increased the number of points requiring guard and stretched escort resources thinly across a broader front. The attacker exploited these expanded protection demands by assigning small mobile interdiction teams to harass isolated convoys and by focusing artillery fires on known assembly areas, sustaining an operational pressure that prevented rapid accumulation of repair capability. Reserve formations played a decisive role in shaping local outcomes as committed reinforcements could either restore flow along interdicted axes or, when immobilized in escort duties, leave adjacent sectors exposed. Commanders on both sides faced recurring dilemmas between using reserves for immediate relief of critical nodes and conserving them for counteroffensive or defensive depth. Where attacking forces established temporary control of junctions, they placed denial obstacles and prepared firing sectors to deny the defender easy reoccupation. These obstacles included demolished spans, mined approaches and pre-placed block positions designed to slow any attempt to reopen repair corridors. Concurrently, salvage and clearance teams worked under protection to render damaged electrical components safe for handling, yet the presence of unexploded ordnance and of residual thermal hazards frequently mandated sequential clearance that consumed time and manpower. Civil-military coordination became a central feature of the development phase as municipal services were integrated into military logistics to assist in stabilizing essential services while under protection, and local infrastructure personnel were seconded to engineering detachments to leverage technical expertise for temporary restorations. This cooperation yielded limited gains in patch repairs and in maintaining emergency services but could not substitute for heavy industrial replacements that required specialist lifting and transport capacity. As repair attempts concentrated, strike planners observed clustering behavior and redirected interdiction assets to staging areas where spare parts and heavy equipment aggregated, thereby perpetuating the cycle of damage and denial. The fluid contest over access and communications created a theater in which territorial control was subordinate to the capacity to protect and to sustain repair effort. Holding a junction conferred more operational advantage than holding adjacent ground that lacked logistical value, and the accumulation of small tactical wins around transport and energy nodes progressively shaped the larger operational picture. Commanders adjusted by creating layered defense in depth around the most vital nodes and by employing deception to mask the location of critical repair activities, yet every protective measure required resources that could not be spared from other tasks. The development phase thus hardened into a protracted contest of attrition over sustainment, where success depended on the ability to maintain distributed logistics, to secure repair corridors and to deny the adversary the freedom to concentrate restoration capacity. The confrontation reached culmination when both commands exhausted the initial reserves that had supported continuous offensive and defensive activity. For the attacking side, the decisive intent shifted from immediate destruction to consolidation of pressure by maintaining interdiction of repair zones and by denying the restoration of full logistical throughput. Strike coordination centers refined target selection toward nodes that demonstrated renewed activity, employing reconnaissance feedback loops to hit freshly installed bypass lines, mobile generators, and field depots assembled in the suburbs. These repetitive interdictions prevented the defender from stabilizing the energy grid and prolonged the blackout conditions that constrained command and transport. The attacking side redeployed mobile launchers to secondary positions to avoid counter-battery detection, sustaining a tempo of precision fire that was slower but continuous, ensuring no period of complete restoration. For the defender, culmination expressed itself through the mounting strain of protection tasks and the diminishing margin for maneuver. Engineering brigades, already depleted by attrition and exhaustion, struggled to meet simultaneous requirements for reconstruction and for protection of their own convoys. Civil defense forces reinforced them, converting municipal repair teams into auxiliary military detachments under command of regional headquarters. Counterstrike potential was preserved through selective employment of remaining missile and drone assets against fuel depots and ammunition stores located inside the adversary's border regions. These retaliatory actions, though smaller in scale, achieved symbolic parity and imposed disruptions within enemy supply chains, demonstrating retained strike capability despite degradation. Urban combat activity intensified in the outer industrial belts where isolated enemy sabotage groups attempted to infiltrate repair areas and to destroy temporary substations. Infantry formations cleared these zones methodically, operating under combined protection from armored patrols and electronic warfare screens that disrupted remote detonation signals. Each engagement was localized but collectively sustained the climate of operational friction that prevented either side from claiming full control. Air defense assets operated at high consumption rates, intercepting sporadic salvos and drone incursions. Resupply intervals lengthened as convoy security requirements multiplied and as the number of functioning routes diminished. Command at the national level faced the dual imperative of maintaining civil stability under rolling power shortages and coordinating limited offensive actions to preserve morale and deterrence. By this stage, the attacking command confronted its own diminishing returns. Every additional missile or drone expended yielded smaller marginal advantage as defended nodes became harder targets and as the defender improved redundancy through dispersed microgrids and hardened control centers. Intelligence assessments indicated that prolonged pressure without territorial follow-up risked operational stagnation. Nonetheless, command directives insisted on sustaining harassment of transport and fuel nodes to prevent the defender from regaining full logistical capacity. Reserve formations on both sides were repositioned, attackers rotated fresh crews into launch operations, while defenders redirected armored reserves from secondary fronts to the capital's periphery to deter potential ground incursions. Reciprocal attrition across fuel, munitions, and replacement parts created a balanced exhaustion that defined the culmination point. Neither side could expand the scale of operations without external reinforcement. The city functioned under an emergency regime, maintaining only essential services powered by mobile units, while heavy industry operated at minimal output. Transportation of military supplies relied on improvised night convoys and river barge traffic concealed under camouflage nets. The attacker maintained situational awareness through persistent aerial reconnaissance but refrained from committing large formations into urban terrain, calculating that continued interdiction and psychological strain would achieve more than costly assault. At culmination, the front stabilized around a pattern of mutual interdiction, each attempt at restoration invited another strike, and every retaliatory action provoked renewed suppression. The outcome was not a decisive breakthrough but the establishment of a sustained operational deadlock characterized by constrained energy supply, disrupted logistics, and degraded mobility. Both commands transitioned from rapid offensive cycles to attritional endurance, with attention turning to replenishment of critical components and to the preparation of subsequent phases. In the final stage, both sides shifted from offensive execution to consolidation and repair under persistent threat. The attacking command focused on maintaining pressure through controlled tempo strikes and on denying the defender the freedom to regroup or restore industrial capacity, while the defending command concentrated on stabilizing power distribution, preserving morale, and protecting residual logistics chains. Urban districts remained in partial blackout, operating on improvised grids and emergency power supplies. Engineering brigades divided their resources between constructing hardened shelters for critical installations and clearing unexploded ordnance from previous bombardments. Mobile generators, field transformers, and ad hoc cabling replaced damaged infrastructure, forming a patchwork network designed to sustain minimal command and medical functions. The attacker kept interdiction cells active around the periphery of the capital, launching limited precision strikes whenever movement patterns indicated the concentration of repair equipment or large convoys. These actions prevented full restoration of the grid and forced the defender to maintain dispersal of assets, effectively converting every reconstruction effort into a potential combat operation. Surveillance drones circled beyond the engagement envelope, documenting recovery progress and transmitting coordinates for intermittent artillery harassment. At the same time, psychological and information warfare elements attempted to amplify the perception of vulnerability inside the city, seeking to erode confidence in the effectiveness of defensive repair measures. For the defender, the consolidation phase required integration of military and civilian logistics into a single framework. Regional administrations coordinated fuel distribution to ensure that hospitals, command centers, and air defense sites remained operational. Security detachments were assigned to escort convoys carrying heavy transformers and spare parts, while rapid reaction platoons guarded critical road junctions and railway approaches. Industrial workshops were repurposed into repair hubs for electrical components and unmanned platforms. Despite constrained resources, restoration proceeded incrementally, with power returning to key government sectors and partial reopening of rail connections for humanitarian and supply movements. The attacker adjusted strategy to prevent overextension. Ammunition stocks were preserved for deterrent salvos rather than continuous bombardment, and reconnaissance assets were rotated to maintain constant observation without exhausting crews. Field headquarters compiled damage assessments indicating that repeated strikes had reduced the city's transmission capacity by a measurable fraction and forced permanent redistribution of air defense systems. Nevertheless, command analysts recognized diminishing strategic returns. Each additional strike consumed valuable resources while the defender's adaptive recovery mitigated longer-term effects. Gradually, both sides entered a state of operational fatigue. Logistics convoys became targets of opportunity rather than decisive objectives. Frontline formations stabilized on outer belts of the metropolitan area, establishing semi-permanent positions from which they could protect or threaten main highways. Intelligence exchanges confirmed that neither side intended immediate escalation into a ground assault, preferring to hold pressure through precision fires and blockade of supply corridors. Civil administration under military oversight implemented rationing systems, ensuring food and medical supply continuity. By the end of the stage, the operational environment had solidified into controlled attrition. The capital functioned under restricted energy schedules, transport was restored only for essential needs. The attacker maintained observation and strike readiness but refrained from further escalation. The defender maintained layered defense and continuous repair, balancing exhaustion against necessity. The line of contact became static, defined not by terrain gained or lost but by the balance between interdiction and recovery. Both commands prepared analytical reviews to assess endurance, resource expenditure, and the feasibility of renewed offensive operations under conditions of cumulative depletion. The final analytical assessment identified that the confrontation over the capital altered the strategic environment without producing immediate territorial revision. The outcome was expressed in a reconfiguration of operational priorities on both sides. For the attacker, sustained pressure achieved the principal objective of overloading the defender's logistics and forcing redistribution of manpower from offensive formations into static protection and repair. The prolonged interdiction imposed measurable degradation of energy output, limited mobility across central regions, and generated an enduring need to guard industrial and transport infrastructure. The defending state retained control of the capital but under a regime of constrained supply and chronic vulnerability to renewed precision strikes. Its command network remained functional through redundancy and adaptation, yet its resource base was consumed by the requirements of restoration and civil stabilization. The tactical gains obtained by the attacker, periodic paralysis of communications, temporary blackout of transport hubs and attrition of engineering capability, did not translate into strategic breakthrough. The absence of decisive ground exploitation converted the offensive into a campaign of controlled exhaustion. Industrial production shifted toward repair rather than expansion, and the attacker's munitions expenditure exceeded replacement rates, reducing flexibility for subsequent operations. Intelligence evaluation concluded that while the capital remained under strain, its defensive systems and redundancy measures had evolved, reducing vulnerability to identical patterns of attack. The defender's integration of civil and military logistics produced a semi-resilient model of distributed sustainment, mitigating some of the coercive effects sought by the adversary. At the regional level, both sides modified operational posture. The attacker consolidated along peripheral sectors to maintain observation and to prepare for renewed strikes should political or military directives change. The defender prioritized decentralization of power generation, relocation of key industries, and fortification of substations and rail hubs beyond the immediate range of high-precision weapons. This adaptation reduced the likelihood of systemic collapse from a single wave of strikes. The continuous cycle of attack and repair entrenched a new equilibrium defined by intermittent escalation, where short bursts of kinetic activity alternated with periods of technical recovery. Strategically, the campaign demonstrated that concentrated attacks on critical infrastructure could achieve temporary paralysis but not sustained capitulation when the targeted command retained redundancy and external support. The attrition of material resources and technical specialists on both sides created long-term implications for future operations. The defending force, though physically weakened, achieved strategic resilience by maintaining operational command and public order under pressure. The attacking force retained the capability to threaten but at diminishing efficiency. Both commands entered a period of recalibration, emphasizing replenishment of precision munitions, protection of industrial capacity, and fortification of logistics corridors. The broader consequence extended beyond the capital theater. The confrontation redefined the operational logic of the conflict. Energy, transport, and communication systems became primary battlefields equal in importance to territorial fronts. Command doctrines were revised to treat infrastructure as both weapon and target, embedding engineers and technicians into frontline structures. This shift institutionalized protracted hybrid warfare in which endurance of industrial and civil systems determined combat viability. In summary, the attack on the capital and the immediate retaliation marked a transition from offensive surge to systemic containment. The city withstood the assault, the attacker retained the capability to strike again, and both commands faced the same outcome: depletion without decision. The strategic balance remained intact, but the character of the war changed permanently. Decisive victories became improbable, and survival of systems, not seizure of ground, became the measure of success.